All right, welcome back, everybody. This is Dr. Jim.
Jodie Bowdick, hi.
Hope everyone is doing well out there this week, right? So we had an amazing opportunity to sit down with Dr. John Demartini. For those of you that don't know who he is, you will know. I'm sure many of you do know who he is. So, author. I mean, what does he not do?
Right.
World-renowned author, speaker, researcher. I mean, just an absolute amazing human being. And there was a lengthy conversation with a lot of things going on. It was absolutely amazing.
I loved how personal he was, and his daughter was amazing, like absolutely amazing. We walk in and they're hugging us and stay later, we want to show you stuff, this is what your life is going to be. I was like, oh my God, it was really, like, we both were like kids at a candy store, but then we're like trying to be all professional.
Trying to hold it together.
It was. Jim came and danced and he's like, ah!
But one of the first things he was talking about was synchronicities.
Yeah.
And I know we're going to show that part today.
Yeah.
And we'll show that part of what he's talking about.
Yeah.
So you want to explain to him what synchronicity is? So it's like when you're on a path or things where you want to be, whether you're either manifesting it consciously or subconsciously, things will show up. Mm-hmm. And they have an amazing way of showing up as long as you're present to them and you can see. I had actually Jamie, thank you Jamie, I was going through some things that just needed to talk, and he had brought up the conversation was like, you've gotten me to be able to see a lot of things, and he goes, and right now you've got so much chaos going on. He goes, you can't see what's right in front of you. And he goes, and all the answers are right in front of you. So everything, and no matter where you're at in life, always you just got to look like who's showing up right in front of you and why they're showing up right in front of you. The answers are always there. So when Dr. John was talking about that, it was an amazing story. So you guys will see that. But how does that show up for you? Especially recently.
Yeah, right.
It's been going on.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So, it's crazy. I don't even know if I told you all this, but I published this book, and it was kind of crazy how that happened. Is I was literally laying in bed crying one night because I was like, I have this mission, I have this calling, I don't know how I'm going to get there, I'm going to keep my lights on to do it. And I opened up Chicken Soup for the Soul, or The Secret, and it came to, I was reading Dr. Demartini's thing, I was reading Jack Canfield, and all of a sudden I was like, same night I was watching Oprah, and it had Mastin Kipp on there, Marie Forleo, Gabby Bernstein, and Chris Carr. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. How come I'm not on TV with them? Like, that's what I want to do with my life. That's what I've been shown. So I text my girlfriend, and she's Nate Burgess's PR rep. And I was like, hey, how do I do this? And I said, I want to go on TV. And she's like, well, start a Twitter account. Crazy thing is I started a Twitter account. It went to the wrong email address. I had to go through the domains, find a lady who, if domain it was, she was the editor for Chicken Soup for the Soul. Like, how crazy is that, right?
Right.
So then the book gets published. I'm walking out my condo, and I literally run into Joel Osteen, like smash dab into him, and we both started laughing. I'm like, oh, sorry. I meet you the next month, and I'm like, okay. So then we start rolling all this stuff together, and then The Secret was such a huge book for me to make all these changes and to see things like, sometimes when you're on this road and you feel like you're the only one that's on this road because it's not really normal to be like that, especially where I come from. But yeah, so then I just followed those synchronicities, and then something kept telling me to ask you to go places with me, and I'm like, I'm not asking him. And then I kept asking you, and you're like, yeah, I'll go. And I'm like, right?
Pretty good company. Thanks.
Yeah. So, and then not knowing that I was asking you so that you would come up with the idea to do this, I was like, why am I supposed to do something with him? Why am I supposed to go there with him? And it just, and all these little things just started dropping. And then within the last month, it was just like I got to sit next to Pastor John Gray's mom and do that interview with her.
Right.
We just got asked to do a mastermind group with somebody that we both admire, you know? It's like all those synchronicities. Like, I have goosebumps telling you this. Like, just pay attention and say yes, because sometimes you're scared and you're like, oh gosh. And with Dr. Demartini, you said, hey, he's coming. You want to see him? And I'm like, yeah. And then I didn't even tell you, and I just emailed, and I was like, hey, and then that conversation started with his daughter, and you're like, oh my gosh, really? And I'm like, yes, and then we got to do that.
Right.
And it was just like and then he sat us afterwards, you guys, it was so phenomenal. And he was like, I want to show you guys what your future can be like. And it was so cool. You got to just step into it. And if you know you have a calling, you know you're supposed to do something, then just do it. So, yeah.
Yeah, so everybody he talks really fast.
He gives a lot of
but
information.
It's so much information that's so valuable. So we're going to roll that right now. So just make sure and watch it, take some notes from a very powerful leader. So thank you guys.
Yeah, appreciate you.
Dr. Jim and Jodie, we're here with Dr. John Demartini. So excited. I'm like a kid in a candy store right now.
He was dancing in the lobby.
I danced in here. So this is great. So I want to thank you, number one, for being on.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for doing the interview.
Last night was amazing. It really, it just, a lot of light bulbs. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great reminder because I've heard you speak a few times, and a lot of those things I was like, damn. Forget that practice. Just lose that communication.
Yep.
But
well, I love sharing. It's what I love doing. So I'm glad to know that something came across there.
Oh, that's great.
You just have such an amazing, peaceful, fun energy about it, though. Yeah, it was just we kept talking all day today about different things that you said. It was
yes.
It was great.
I sometimes get a little bit more. What's the word? Lax with the group sometimes.
Yeah, we like that.
when people ask interesting questions, I go there.
Yeah,
that's great. So I got a question. I've heard you speak multiple times, and you spoke about running into Howard Hughes when you were 19, I believe. That's when it was.
Actually, when I was 14.
You were 14. Got it.
I was hitchhiking from Houston, Texas, to California, and I was going out to ride waves in California, and I was 14 years old. And I ended up getting a ride. In those days, the Interstate 10, which is the Intercontinental Highway, wasn't completed yet. And El Paso, that was still under construction and still not even begun. And so I had to go through the downtown area when I got that ride. And I got dropped off downtown. And I was walking through downtown, and in those days, surfers, which were kind of long hairs, and cowboys, which are kind of redneck short hairs, with a lot of clashing. And 3 cowboys stopped in the sidewalk and lined up and were about to confront me as kind of a headbanded, long-haired hippie kid.
Right.
And had a surfboard, and I knew I couldn't go in the store because I'd be trapped. I couldn't outrun them with a board, and I couldn't go in the street, and I had to go through these guys. And so I didn't know what to do, and so I just acted like a wild animal.
At 14.
14 years old. They were about probably 18 to 21, something like that.
Went primal on them.
Yeah, I went primal on them and just outrageously, growling at them. And I learned that from an old surfer who wanted to get rid of other surfers in the surf lineup. And he used to just growl and act wild, and these guys go, that guy's weird, and they'd leave. I thought of that as I did it. And it worked. These guys moved to the side, and I went growling right through them, and they moved to the side. And there was an old guy, he's my age now, but it seemed old then. But there's an old guy that was standing, leaning on a lamppost on the corner of downtown El Paso Library on a gas lamp, leaning on this gas lamp. And he saw what I did, and he came by, and he came over there, and he put his arm on my shoulder. He walked up to me, put his arm on my shoulder, and he said, Sonny, that was the funniest dang thing I've ever seen. You took care of them cowpokes like a pro. He said, can I buy you a cup of coffee? And I said, I don't drink coffee, sir. And he says, can I buy you a cup of Coca-Cola? And I said, yes, sir. So we went up to this little malt shop, and it was these swivel stools, that they had in those days.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And right in the corner, a couple quarters down. And he said, are you a runaway? And I said, well, I got a ride to the highway, so I didn't run. I'm just hitchhiking to California. He said, did you drop out of school? And I said, yes, sir. He said, you look pretty funny with a surfboard in El Paso. It's not a surf place. I said, I'm on my way to California. He says, I could tell. He says, you through with your Coke? And I said, yes, sir. He said, then come with me and follow me. I want to show you something. And I have to admit that I had a few intuitions about just following somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I didn't know what people are going to do. But there was something about the guy that just seemed sincere, and so I followed him. And he paid for the Coke. We went down a couple blocks, another couple blocks over, and up these steps. And it was a downtown El Paso library. And we walked up these steps, walked in, and there was an information booth. And there's a little old lady there, and he said, "Can you watch this young man's stuff while we go in the library?" She says, "I can." So I left everything I owned right at the front behind this information. We walked down some steps, down the floor, up some more steps, into this this area of the library. He said, "Sonny, sit down at this table, and I'll be right back." And he goes off and gets 2 books, brings them back to the table, lays them on top of each other, turns kind of corner to me, and he looks at me and he leans forward and he says, "Young man, I have 2 things I want to teach you, and you got to promise me you'll never forget these." I said, "Yes, sir." And he says, "Number 1 is never judge a book by its cover." Mm-hmm. He showed me the covers, and they were dusty old covers, kind of old beat up covers, like the books have been like 75 to 100 years old or something. He says, "Never judge a book by its cover, because it will fool you." He said, "Young man, you probably think I'm some old guy on the street, but young man, I'm one of the wealthiest men in the world. I have everything that money can buy. I have ships and planes and businesses and homes, everything money can buy. But recently somebody passed away from me, and I want to know what it's like to not have too. And I'm telling you right now," I said, "don't ever judge a book by its cover, because it'll fool you. Because you'll just think I'm some old guy, but don't let it fool you."
Right.
And number 2, and he grabbed my hand and he stuck them on top of those books. And he said, "Young man, you learn how to read. You learn how to read, boy. Because there's only 2 things you can never take away from your life. See, they can take away your loved ones, they can take away your possessions, but nobody can ever take away your love and your wisdom." Mm. And he says, so he put my hand on top of Plato and Aristotle. And he says, "You learn how to read, and you gain the wisdom of love and the love of wisdom." And I said, "Yes, sir." And he says, "Don't ever forget that, boy." He took the books and put them back on the shelves, and then he basically he walked me back to get my stuff, and he told me how to go back onto the main highway to go to California.
Yeah.
And I never forgot that. I didn't know who the guy was, but I just thought it was interesting, because why would somebody say I'm one of the wealthiest men in the world? It seemed kind of odd. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until many years later that I was having dinner with a gentleman who did the movie, Robert Coswell, who had produced a movie with William Hurt called The Doctor. Mm. And I was there having dinner with him in Sydney, Australia, and with Robert, who was friends with the casting director, Faith Martin. "What are you doing in you normally live in California, in Malibu. What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, my home in Malibu is getting redesigned with an interior designer. And there's an amazing interior designer. They're redoing the whole thing. And we're here at our other home here in Australia while we're waiting, while they fix it up." And I said, "Fantastic." We finished the dinner. I went to bed, got up in the morning. I flew to California and into Houston. And I landed in Houston in the late afternoon, and I went quickly to my hotel at the Westin, and there's a cheesecake factory right next door. So I quickly wanted to go to the cheesecake factory and quickly get something to eat, and then go to my office to work, because I sometimes work till 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
And when I went in there, there was a big long line, and I didn't want to wait, but I really wanted some soup and some bread. So I went to the bar area, because you could eat at the bar area. I went to the bar area, and I stood there, and there's a big crowd there waiting for tables. And I just stood there, figured that they would clear out, and I would eventually get to a seat. And when I was doing it, I noticed there was a woman sitting in a booth all by herself. And I was thinking, she's just sitting there. Maybe if a guy comes here, maybe not, but if a guy didn't come here, I may ask her if I can join her. And so 5 or 10 minutes, 15, 20 minutes goes by, and I finally leaned over to her. I said, "Excuse me, ma'am, are you alone?" And she goes, "I am." It says, "I'm really in a hurry. I don't want to wait. I really have things to do. If I was to buy you dinner, could I just join you just so I could sit here?" And she says, "You don't have to buy me dinner to join me. Please, join me."
Nice.
I said, "Thank you." So we started sitting down. I said, "What do you do?" And she says, "I'm an interior designer." And I said, "Really? What do you design?" She says, "I'm designing beautiful high-end homes for people all over the world." And I said, "Oh, that's interesting." I said, "What are you working on right now?" She says, "I'm working on a house in Malibu."
Wow.
And all of a sudden I got chills up my spine. I said, "It doesn't happen to be Robert Coswell's house." And she goes, "It is Robert Coswell's house." I said, "I just had dinner with him last night in Sydney, Australia." And in the process of doing that, she said, "You were just with Robert last night?" I said, "I was just Robert. He's there because he told me that he was getting his house redone in Malibu by an incredible interior designer, and it looks like I'm sitting with this incredible interior designer." She goes, "Isn't that synchronous? There's something about you. You're intriguing." So we chatted, and I said, how did you get involved in interior design? And she started revealing some of the history of that. And then she said, what do you do? And I said, well, I travel around the world speaking and writing books and trying to inspire people. And she said, how did you get involved in that? So I told her a story about my childhood and about me leaving home and of actually going to California and eventually to Hawaii. And when I told her the story about going through El Paso, Texas, which I included, I told her a story about this old man that I met on the street. And when I told her everything, the library and everything, never judge a book by its cover and anything else, she started crying. She just started bawling. And I said, did I say something to offend you? And she says, no. I said, you okay? She says, I'm fine. I said, what's so emotional? And she says, that man that you're talking about, that's part of my family. Mm. I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, and she started to say exactly the same thing he said. And he says, he taught all of us that. He said that same thing to all of us, and we were young. I said, so do you know this gentleman? And she says, yes, that's part of my family. And I said, who are you? She says, I'm Natalie Hughes.
Wow.
And so I got this chill in my spine. And we had this incredible conversation, and she told me her whole story.
Yeah.
Because it's a very interesting, convoluted story about his life. And so in the process of doing that, I went back that night, and I started, of course, getting on Google and trying to find some sort of loose end, because I would never have thought that.
Yeah.
In fact, I wrote in Chicken Soup for the Soul, the third serving, that story without ever knowing who he was. And then I realized, I looked it up, and I found out he was doing an El Paso natural gas deal that week in El Paso, which was 2 blocks away from where we met.
Wow.
So it was actually him. And when I looked at the picture,
That's
and
incredible.
my age right now is the age he was then.
Wow.
So
How often are you noticing things that are synchronous like that in your life?
Lots.
Yeah.